So this document discusses a number of different layout options which we'll run through. So things like underscore layout, partials, rendering sections, and using alternative layouts. And I'll briefly mention components as well. So as we've seen previously with the starter project with Visual Studio, where you've got a controller, your home controller, you have got actions in here. So for example, this action here, index, is calling the view, and it picks up that view in home and index here. And so this is the view, and this view, like all the others by default, is going to be templated. It's going to use a template which by default is in shared, and it's this underscore layout file here. So this is the basic template. So we can do things like calling standard CSS files. We could call in JavaScript there as well. Notice how the title is dynamic. We'll come to view data in a later movie. You've got standard navigation options, and then this @render body bit is where the content of any given view is read into that template. So that's the standard way that the underscore layout technique works. So in the vast majority of cases, that will cover you for a lot of bases, particularly if the website has just basically got one kind of fairly basic layout, and you're just reading different content into the render body based on what you have in any given view file. Okay, but sometimes that is a little bit too limited and you want to take things a bit further, so that's what some of these options will help you do. So the first option is something called partials. So partial is conventionally created in views, shared, and you give it a suitable name, and it's exactly like a layout in that you put HTML in there. You can also put C# in there because it's a razor page, and then the idea is that it's a chunk of code that you could use in any particular view file. So it's in this example we've got a footer, and then what I could choose to do, say in my index, in my layout demo view, you'll see that I've referenced that partial with this thing here. So we have what's known as a tag helper. So we have a partial, and the name of it is underscore footer. So the naming convention will know to look in views, look in shared, and find underscore footer to load it in at that part of the document there. So if I fire this up in the browser, just launched the demo project, I'll be able to see that there's my home. Notice there's no footer there, but if I go to partials and sections, so this is the layout demo, I can see it has picked up the footer there. So that's the result of that partial. Okay, so they're dead useful, and you've got a chunk of code that you want to optionally place in any given view. Okay, so that's one option. Another technique you can use is something called an @render section. So this works slightly differently in that what you do in your layout is you define a render section with @render section. You give it a name, you can indicate whether it's required or not, so that if it's not used in a particular view it won't throw an error. So I've called this one my scripts, and the idea is that pages using this layout can optionally have this additional render section as well as the render body. So what I've done in the index view here, sorry, it's in the layout demo view again, we reference that in with a @section. So this is demoing the partial and also the render section. So @section my scripts, that was what it was called here. It's saying, okay, yes, we can have this optional section here, and then what you can do inside of the the view itself is then you can add in some optional content. So this layout demo is going to get that script file, which is just going to create a little digital clock inside of there. So, but that's optional. So other pages that use this underscore layout won't necessarily get that unless that code is placed there. So if I run that, you'll see that over in the sample, we go to here. So there's, you can see the clock's running, because if we right click and inspect, we can see there's the code there that's been optionally loaded in. Now the benefit of that approach is that because that's an optional section, I could grab that and let's say I put it in the index page down here. So that's now gone into the index view, and I'll save that. And let's fire it back up again. So that's going to load that JavaScript into that page as well, which might actually cause an issue because it's not got the related HTML. So if I right click and inspect, we can see yes, it's causing an error because it's referencing a DOM element to create the clock, which doesn't exist in that page. So you see it's loading the JavaScript in there. So that's one of the benefits of this approach, is that because I don't want that code on every page, that JavaScript on every page, I can add it in as an optional render section. So I've illustrated it with JavaScript there, and that was a really good use case for the render section. That's what they do in the starter bootstrap MVC project. If you have a dig around at that, you'll notice they have a render section that loads in a partial. So you can combine the two techniques. So it loads in a partial, and that partial's actually got loads of different JavaScript in it that's loaded in as a chunk optionally on different pages within the view. Okay, and another great technique is just to create alternative layouts. So you're not stuck with this one layout page, because imagine you're then indicating that every page is going to have that CSS page, unless you of course use a render section, but it's quite limiting, and every page is going to have to follow that HTML structure, which is okay. But imagine your page divides up into logical sections, into logical topics. You might want a completely different layout template to be deployed, and the way that you can do that is you can just create yourself in shared, just create yourself a different layout. So I've created one here called underscore alternative layout. So it's just got a different structure of HTML. That render body could be placed in a different location, and then this one I've actually put the footer directly in there rather than being in a partial, so I won't need a partial in this instance. Notice I can use the render section as well if I want, and it's loading a different CSS file. So if I wanted to use that layout view as an alternative to the default underscore layout, then I've got one here which is second layout demo, that's the one. So this one here has this razor code at the top, a razor block, and it's saying that the layout is actually underscore alternative layout, so it will reference that alternative layout file. Now you'll notice in the other files here the layout wasn't referenced because it will just default to underscore layout, but you can overrule that by explicitly saying no, please try and use this one instead. So let's fire that up. So this will give a completely different appearance. So it's this alternative layout here. It's going to go to second layout demo. So it picks up a completely different style sheet, different content up there for the navigation, and it's got a footer built in rather than as a partial. Okay, so you can obviously create as many of those as you like, so you have got complete flexibility. You're not completely dependent on one underscore layout. You can create alternative ones and then just make sure you reference them in here. Okay, and then the final technique I've listed in the document here is something called components. This is getting a little bit more complex. I'll just skirt over this because we'll revisit this later when we look at more complicated features like shopping carts. Basically, the idea is there's something called a view component class, so you can create your own view component based on that view component class. There's a naming convention where so I've created one here called wish list, which is a fairly trivial one. So that's my view component created with some basic content. It's just basically setting one variable. Then so it's kind of like a controller, and then you can create a custom view, but the naming convention is because it's component, you do it in a components folder, and then you can invoke that in any given view to load that content in as a chunk. Different apart from partials, because the idea is that you can associate separate code with the component. So I mentioned they're really great for things like shopping carts. So we have got one of those set up in the sample project. You'll see you've got components, there's a wish list, and we've got the view component set up there with the simple view component in there. So it's kind of like a controller, but just for the component. And when I fire that up, that's actually been invoked in the index page, and that will create this little wish list blocks here with Star Wars there being the dynamic value. How that dynamic value got in there was, if we look at the view component, it was sent to the view by this thing called view bag, which is what we'll look at next, which is getting into the different ways that you can send data from the controllers, or in this case the view component, to the view, and that's the next little topic.